The House of God. Traced through the Scriptures. E. Dennett. Reprinted from The Christian Friend and Instructor, Broom. 2. The Temple of Solomon. The Tabernacle, which had been the house of God in the wilderness, together with its sacred furniture, was carried by the children of Israel into Canaan, and was pitched in Shiloh. Joshua 18 verse 1. It was accordingly to this place that the children of Israel resorted with their yearly sacrifices, 1 Samuel 1 verse 3, and it was still called the Tabernacle of the Congregation, 1 Samuel 2 verse 22, but also the Temple of the Lord, and the House of the Lord. 1 Samuel 3 verses 3 and 15. These latter names did but foreshadow the house which should hereafter be built in Jerusalem. While the children of Israel were pilgrims in the wilderness, and dwelt in tents, God himself abode in a tent, 2 Samuel 7 verse 6. Suiting himself, as he has ever done in his precious grace, to the condition of his people, but when he had established his chosen in the glory of the kingdom, a house was erected exceeding magnifical, which in some measure should be the expression of his majesty, who deigned to make it his dwelling place in the midst of Israel. 2 Chronicles 2 verses 4 to 6. It is not within our present purpose to call attention to the characteristic differences between the tabernacle and the temple, but rather to point out their similarity both as to origin and object. As in the case of the former, so in the latter, the plan was divinely communicated. It was David who was honored to become the depositary of this design, and inasmuch as he was not permitted, according to the desire of his own heart, himself to build the temple, he communicated it to Solomon. Then David gave to Solomon his son the pattern of the porch, and of the houses thereof, and of the treasuries thereof, and of the upper chambers thereof, and of the inner parlors thereof, and of the place of the mercy seat, and the pattern of all that he had by the Spirit, of the courts of the house of the Lord, and of all the chambers round about, of the treasuries of the house of God, etc. 1 Chronicles 28 verses 11 to 12. Everything that Solomon did and made, in connection with the work to which he had been called, was in accordance with the instructions he had received. The site itself had been divinely indicated, as well as the design and manner of the building. 1 Kings 6 verse 38, 2 Chronicles 3 verse 3. Though entrusted to human hands to erect, the building was divine, for human thoughts and human conceptions must not intrude themselves into the things of God. The connection between the tabernacle and the temple, as being both alike God's dwelling place, may be seen in two ways. When Solomon had completed the house, he assembled the elders of Israel, and all the heads of the tribes, the chief of the fathers of the children of Israel, and we read that all the men of Israel assembled themselves unto the king, in the feast which was in the 7th month, i.e. the feast of the blowing of trumpets, a figure of the restoration of Israel in the last days, Numbers 29-1. And all the elders came, and the Levites took up the ark, and they brought up the ark and the tabernacle of the congregation, and all the holy vessels that were in the tabernacle, these did the priests and the Levites bring up. And then, after they had sacrificed sheep and oxen without number, the priests brought in the ark of the covenant of the Lord unto his place, to the oracle of the house, into the most holy place, under the wings of the cherubim. 2 Chronicles 5 verses 1 to 7. It was the ark that gave its character to the house, for it was God's throne in the midst of Israel, from whence he governed his people on the basis of his holy law, as is noted here by the statement that there was nothing in the ark, save the 2 tables which Moses put therein at Horeb, when the Lord made a covenant with the children of Israel, when they came out of Egypt. Verse 10. And now, secondly, the Lord endorsed the work of his servants by taking possession of the new house, even as he had formerly done with the tabernacle. And it came to pass, when the priests were come out of the holy place, for all the priests that were present were sanctified, and did not then wait by course, also the Levites, which were the singers, all of them of Asaph, of Heman, of Jeduthun, with their sons and their brethren, being arrayed in white linen, having cymbals and psalteries and harps, stood at the east end of the altar, and with them 120 priests sounding with trumpets. It came even to pass, as the trumpeters and singers were as one, to make one sound to be heard in praising and thanking the Lord. And when they lifted up their voice with the trumpets and cymbals and instruments of music, and praised the Lord, saying, For he is good, for his mercy endureth forever, that then the house was filled with a cloud, even the house of the Lord, so that the priests could not stand to minister by reason of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord had filled the house of God. 2 Chronicles 5 verses 11 to 14. Following upon this description, we find Solomon reciting the circumstances by which he had become the divinely appointed instrument in building an house of habitation and a place of dwelling for the Lord forever, and then he knelt down on a brazen scaffold, which he had prepared, before all the congregation of Israel, and spread forth his hands towards heaven, and prayed with respect to the house which he had built, and he concluded his intercessions with words cited from Psalm 132. Now therefore arise, O Lord God, into thy resting place, thou, and the ark of thy strength. Let thy priests, O Lord God, be clothed with salvation, and let thy saints rejoice in goodness. O Lord God, turn not away the face of thine anointed, remember the mercies of David, thy servant. And thereon we read, Now when Solomon had made an end of praying, the fire came down from heaven, and consumed the burnt offering and the sacrifices, and the glory of the Lord filled the house. And the priests could not enter into the house of the Lord, because the glory of the Lord had filled the Lord's house. 2 Chronicles 6 verses 41 to 42, 2 Chronicles 7 verses 1 to 2. In this manner and under such circumstances did the Lord take up his abode in the temple, the whole scene, the white-robed priests, and their glorifying God with one mind and one mouth, being no dim foreshadowing of the glory of a later day, when the true Solomon shall come to his temple and surround himself with a righteous and willing-hearted people. But the one point to be observed is, that we find once again God dwelling in his house in the midst of the people whom he had chosen. The difference between the temple and the tabernacle, as before remarked, is shown by the contrast between the wilderness and the land, by the pilgrim character of Israel's passage through the former, as distinguished from their settled abode in the latter. But in both alike God had his habitation, his house. God dwelt in the midst of the whole of Israel, and, as seen again from the fact that the fire came down in response to Solomon's prayer and consumed the burnt offering and sacrifices, did so on the ground of redemption through the value of all that Christ was in his sacrificial work. It had not been possible on any other ground, but because it was on the foundation of all the sweet savor of Christ in his death, he could, spite of what the people were practically, dwell in their midst, and all the people, on their part, could come with the appointed sacrifices, in the appointed way, and at the appointed times. Thenceforward Jerusalem was the one holy place on earth, the one spot, therefore, to which the heart of every true Israelite turned with thoughts of worship and praise. How amiable are thy tabernacles, O Lord of hosts! My soul longeth, yea, even fainteth, for the courts of the Lord, my heart and my flesh crieth out for the living God. Blessed are they that dwell in thy house, they will be still praising thee. Psalm 84, and thereon the recurrence of the feasts the people assembled. Jerusalem is builded as a city that is compact together, whither the tribes go up, the tribes of the Lord, unto the testimony of Israel, to give thanks unto the name of the Lord. Psalm 122 verses 3 to 4. There all the firstborn children were carried and presented to the Lord, Luke 2 verses 22 to 24, and thereto the families of his people assembled 3 times a year. See Deuteronomy 16. Jerusalem, therefore, because of Jehovah's house, was the one place of blessing in the whole world, and it was no mean privilege to be permitted to form part of the assembly that gathered there from time to time in obedience to the word. And thou shalt rejoice before the Lord thy God, thou, and thy son, and thy daughter, and thy manservant, and thy maidservant, and the Levite that is within thy gates, and the stranger, and the fatherless, and the widow, that are among you, in the place which the Lord thy God hath chosen to place his name there. Deuteronomy 16 verse 11.